First of all, I think it's not enough with having public sector financing. We really need to also attract private sector financing. You mentioned EIB. We also have attracted money from pension fund investors. We were the first fund who got the credit rating. And actually, we're trying to mobilize as much money as we can for the poorer rural smallholders. As you mentioned, we're seeing them suffering because of the cost of living crisis. And at the same time, a lot of the food prices have been coming up. It's true that even before the invasion, for example, soy, also corn was already very high just after the pandemic. We've seen wheat coming down, which has been quite positive. At the same time, we expect the struggle to continue, both on food inputs as well as on fertilizers.
Before we start talking about solutions, because I'm not going to continue this interview without a hopeful end to it, I want to talk about the impact the war in Ukraine has had. People say that, or call Ukraine and Russia the breadbasket for the rest of the world. I believe the region accounts for about 40% of total wheat exports. What sort of an impact has the war had, and how important is it that the flows keep going on through those regions despite the geopolitical conflict that we're seeing?
So there's two aspects to it. The first one is food, and obviously wheat and other corn staples, but we also have fertilizers. In the case of the food, countries have actually adjusted. I was yesterday with the Minister of International Cooperation of Egypt. She told me in 3-6 months they had adjusted. They had to redo a lot of their sector, how food systems and food is distributed, how food is produced. That can happen. But actually, what we need to see now is also on fertilizers, how Russian fertilizers are getting out of the country. And we will see the impact for sure this year. Unfortunately, many of the small-scale producers have not been able to use these fertilizers. So the planting season has been bad. The harvesting will be even worse. So there's going to be a massive impact. But what really needs to happen beyond the finalization of the unfair war in Ukraine is actually that we invest in the medium term. Because if we continue just providing humanitarian assistance, this is not going to end. We will just continue from one crisis to the next, handing out, and this is not enough. We need to invest now to reduce the conflict and wars in the future.
What type of investment would you like to see?
So I would like to see massive investments, both from the local governments, and I had now a lot of discussions with a lot of heads of state who are actually seeing food security as national security, but also on bringing private sector. In the case of climate adaptation, private sector accounts for 2% of the overall financing. That's not enough. And many of these businesses, the highest risk will probably be environmental. The World Economic Forum has said among the top 10 risks for the next 10 years, 4 of them are climate, 7 are climate and societal. So we need to invest also on people. Most of the poor people live in rural areas. And unless we change this, I mean, you will see forced migration, you will see continued conflict. You can see many of the populations in Africa are going to grow. Niger from 23 to 63 million, triple. Nigeria from 200 to 400 million. Either we give these people opportunities or otherwise only conflict and migration will continue rising.
Yeah. One way to think about it is that companies need to be given incentives to invest more in these types of technologies. Do you think regulation and also governments should play a bigger role in encouraging companies to invest and making it easier for them to invest?
Well, the first thing is food systems, basically how food is produced, distributed, stored, and so on. So we know that there's a distortion of 500 to 600 billion in terms of taxes and subsidies related to food. That's the start of everything. Apart from that, we also need to make sure that there's an enabling environment and that we speak a common language. The common language nowadays is actually national pathways, food systems national pathways, and that englobes not only agriculture, energy, infrastructure. There's a variety of sectors in order to serve many of these undeserved populations.